In Revelation 21 we are presented with the new consciousness the Son of Man attained in his becoming the Christ. It is an unusual picture of that consciousness as the bride of the Lamb. The bride is not the church as is generally thought, yet is the church within the individual who attains that life exemplified by Jesus. This church is the body of completely spiritualized memory cells. Even though an individual may have attained such a spiritualized state, he is yet subject to that last temptation. And in Revelation 21 there are warnings of such a possibility. Revelation 21 finishes with an overall picture of that generally longed for pastoral and heavenly city with streets of gold. This scene is what can be made of everyday living, and living the way set by Jesus. From the description of this famous city it should readily be seen that the symbols relate to the physical flesh body of man. This is logical when considered in the light of the developments necessary to produce a son of man. The foundations of all his developments were in the earth's forces, which had served him so as to become, after his crucifixion, the Christ. John is being shown the foundations, not just those of the Son of Man but more importantly, of Christ himself. For he had become one with man and the forces affecting man, before he could overcome them, and get them to serve him as the first son. It seems only logical that a savior of man must necessarily need to know all that man could experience in the earth, before he could become the Christ. This overcoming and the developments through the Son of Man as shown in the Revelation was accomplished by the acceptance principle personified in Eve so as to develop a temple, a consciousness worthy to be the dwelling place of all creative forces. Even of God. This building is the holy city, the new consciousness, the bride shown here, and God, through Christ, is the light in it. While a more detailed description of this holy city is given in verses 12 through 21, a summary of its structure is given here, as it relates to the flesh body. The wall corresponds to the skin of the flesh body, the boundary of personal activity and the place of consciousness. The body has 12 orifices. 12 gates. Through these gates come the angelic influences, angels, which are 7 planetary and 5 physical senses. All operate through the endocrine system. While these gates are named for the 12 tribes of Israel, which in turn relate to the 144,000 spiritualized cells, Revelation 7. Their placements in the 4 corners of the earth indicate the 4 earth elements, earth, water, fire and air, basic to man in the earth, his natures, temperaments and memories. His being. The 12 foundations are again the same activities as in the 12 apostles. The measurements of this city relate to the measures, or degree, of understanding obtained by time, space and patience. All as measures of a man. The foundations of the wall and the city, verse 19, with 12 precious stones and the gates of pearl relate to the operation of the vibratory forces in man, the trials and irritations, as they are each perfection in the body, the bride. These developments are shown in the Revelation and pictured here as the structure and essence of the developed new consciousness.
And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea.
References have been made throughout this analysis of the Revelation to the word heaven as being a state of consciousness. This meaning is taken from the readings. What is meant by a new heaven and a new earth? Former things have passed away, when there is beheld within self that the whole will of the Creator, the Father, the place of abode, the forces within and without, make for the new heaven, the new earth. In Revelation 21. What is the meaning of a new heaven and a new earth? For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. When the foundations of the earth are broken up by those very disturbances. Can the mind of man comprehend no desire to sin, no purpose but that the glory of the Son may be manifested in his life? Is this not a new heaven, a new earth? For the former things would have passed away. For as the desires, the purposes, the aims are to bring about the whole change physically, so does it create in the experience of each soul a new vision, a new comprehension. For as has been given, it hath not entered the heart of man to know the glories that have been prepared, that are a part of the experiences of those that love only the Lord and his ways. These two questions and answers give us an answer to the meanings of both heaven and a new heaven, as well as an insight into the total book of the Revelation, which, as we have seen, has to do with consciousness, the contents and the uses we make of it. When we are faced with a completely new understanding of old, tried and accepted ideas that we are comfortable with, it shakes us to the very foundations of our being. We feel lost, or perhaps angry at whomever would dare to intrude into our heart. On the other hand, some of us may be relieved to feel that a new way of thinking about old unnerving concepts relate to them personally and their everyday living relationships. This latter understanding of the revelation is most heartening to many, yet it does not come easy. When faced with a new state of consciousness, wherein a person finds himself one with the very forces in himself, and all his memories are in harmony with the spirit which created them, his awareness would need to identify some place or way to know what had happened to itself. With old concepts of heaven and earth gone, there being no place in the new consciousness for the old, the entity would create for itself a new concept to replace the old one lost. The entity or soul needs a feeling of security. It is thus that with all things, being new to the new mind in the Son of Man, there appeared a new heaven, for all things seemed in perfect harmony. This was a new feeling, a new understanding. This completely new understanding was shown to John as being the new heaven. He had watched the old one taken away. Our lack of ability to comprehend such a concept is pointed above, where this question is posed. Can the mind of man comprehend no desire to sin, no purpose but that the glory of the Son may be manifested in his life? Not all of the question regarding no more see was answered. In view of the reading's use of the word see as relating to the unconscious or subconscious, however, this becomes clear, particularly so when we recall that for the Son the conscious and unconscious had merged, thus doing away with the separated awarenesses in the mind. A little further thinking will also remind us that, as we use the earth forces symbolized by the planetary force of Saturn to create or form our concepts. We use the life force represented by the planet Neptune to give life to the forms so created. In this verse we note that the earth and sea, both were gone. This was because the Son no longer needed, nor would use these forces. They were in light which reached his consciousness in unison with the other such creative forces. He did not use the body's endocrine system to separate his awareness from the whole. The brain functions put all things into proper relationships according to their purposes. All such purposes are unified into a oneness of purposes to manifest in the experiences the glories that have been prepared for those who love the Lord and his ways. Plainly, new responsibilities come with a new heaven, just as they do when we try to live as Jesus taught.
And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband.
The holy city, the New Jerusalem, the new place of abode in the Son and in us, is the center of activities and identity in the new self-awareness. It corresponds to the seat of the old self which has fallen in Revelation 18. There is a new body of activity, a new city of concepts, not the flesh body as it now works in us, and it comes into being from the greater and higher mind. The superconscious mind is now the subconscious mind activating the soul. This is the influencer city John saw coming down from God out of heaven. Such an influence is prepared as a bride, because this portion of new understanding had never been touched even by things earthly. It knows its oneness with God or oneness with the creative forces and knows nothing of the separating or separative body forces. Please explain 2nd through 4th verse of Revelation 21. The New Jerusalem and no more death. Those then that are come into the new life, the new understanding, the new regeneration, there is then the New Jerusalem. For as has been given, the place is not as a place alone but as a condition, as an experience of the soul. Jerusalem has figuratively, symbolically, meant the holy place, the holy city. For there, the Ark of the Covenant in the minds, the hearts, the understandings, the comprehensions of those who have put away the earthly desires and become as the new purposes in their experience, become the new Jerusalem, the new undertakings, the new desires.
And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself shall be with them, and be their God.
The great voice in this new consciousness now proclaims the acceptance of the Son of Man as his own Son. The prodigal son is welcomed by the Father. The new being has become the dwelling place of the pure creative forces of intelligence and nature, and because no earthly or fleshly influences can know this new awareness, the spiritualized body of activities has become the tabernacle of God. And only that intelligence in the creative forces lives with them. Since only those forces are now operative in man, as a model for all men, they shall be his people, thus fulfilling that Old Testament prophecy, they shall be my people, and I will be their God. Thus it is that God himself shall be with them, and he shall be their God. The superconscious, being now the subconscious of the new body, dwells with the new man just as the soul mind dwelt with the old conscious mind. The old subconscious mind had a flair for putting most of its language into symbols, but the new mind now cleansed of earthly tinges, is wholly God-like, able to put all things into proper oneness of relationships. The superconscious can now speak the language of the soul's awareness and be understood. The two can live together in the tabernacle of God. John sees the ultimate. All men becoming sons of God, so he sees God living with them and being their God. In effect he is seen beyond the flesh mind, the soul mind, and into the very being of all.
And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying. Neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things are passed away.
We should understand that the thrust of these verses is as much for us as it was for the Christ. Since God will dwell with us, as the ultimate, here shown to John rather that being spoken to through the old prophets, in the new city, the tabernacle of God, there can be no possibility of tears from their eyes, nor any of those things so human to us, for we will be one with the Spirit of the Creator. Earth's suffering has passed away, into oblivion. One might wish to review 281:37 from the readings under verse 2.
And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful.
The one that sat upon the great white throne, the creative forces, or Christ himself, which now occupied the seat of authority, says, I make all things new. This means a new understanding of all things, for all are seen in a new light. In view of the last line of this verse telling John to write, for these words are true and faithful, one could take this to mean a literal new world and universe. However, since these verses relate to consciousness, it seems that the last line is still in the same context.
And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely.
He that sat on the throne told John, I am Alpha and Omega, which reminds us of Revelation 1:8, when the same words were said by the great voice behind John, and that voice was attributed to Jesus the Christ. It seems to be the same here. The rest of the verse reminds us of Jesus and the woman at the well. Thus it would seem safe to accept this voice as that of the Christ, except that the next verse leads us to the idea that it is of the Father himself. This would indicate that in Jesus' ministry what he said about the Father speaking through him was correct, for they both said the same things.
He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son.
Here again another of the sayings of Jesus is repeated by the one on the throne, this besides the many references to he that overcometh in the revelation itself. One thing that seems clear is that the voice is from the superconscious in the Christ, for Jesus was proclaimed his beloved Son, and the superconscious is that part of each of us that never left God. Again we must keep in mind the idea that we are dealing here with universal forces.
But the fearful and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death.
The universal consciousness reaches the earth awareness in this verse, and admonishes all in regard to following the pathway set by Jesus. This verse indicates that not all souls will be regenerated at once. John had seen the ultimate for man. However, that was necessary to be shown as a fulfilling of the covenant and the promises made by Jesus. Those men who know what they ought to do, but do it not, all have their part in the earth life, the lake of fire and repurification to go through again. Here again we shall repeat this reading's quote in regard to the second death. What is meant by the second death in Revelation 21:8? Those that have passed into the understanding and then fall away, become minded of the earthly desires for self-exaltation, know second death.
And there came unto me one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife.
John was given a picture of the holy city, the New Jerusalem in verse 2. In this verse, however, he was shown the new consciousness, the new city, in much greater detail, for it is that of the Lamb's wife. In verses 3 and 4 we were given a message about this new city, the Lamb's bride, which was also that new consciousness in the body of the Son of Man or Christ. In the next several verses we find a detailed description of this consciousness, but in more universal symbols. We should notice that one of the 7 angels which had the 7 plagues came and talked with John. Which one seems not to matter, for they all were involved in the cleansing of the temple, the body of memories, of consciousness, and all participated in the regeneration process in preparation for the 1,000-year reign. The angels reporting on the perfect cleansing of the body's memory cells is a necessary predicate for understanding the essence of the bride as the Lamb's wife, verses 10 to 21. For the bride, the holy Jerusalem, verse 10, has its foundation in the earth. As we shall see.
And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God.
We should remember that being carried away to a great and high mountain is somewhat like Jesus's experience of being carried by Satan into an exceeding high mountain and shown all the kingdoms of the world. Jesus's temptation by the devil should remind us of God's request for Satan to try Job. This should confirm the statement given in verse 9 that we must all undergo a final temptation, or why else would Jesus be led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted? In this verse we find that John is shown the new place, the holy city, which is the place of the Christ consciousness. This city came from the perfection of the body responses of the Son of Man. We should remember too, that out of the body of Adam, God made Eve to be the wife, helpmeet, the bride for him. It is thus that the marriage of the Lamb pictured in the Revelation is a reenactment of that original marriage in the Garden of Eden, except that this one undoes and cements that original separation. Both are happening inside man. The deep sleep of Adam in the Garden of Eden was the deep sleep of man in the earth, forgetting his maker and unaware of being away from God. Man as a whole seems yet to be in this deep sleep. This is man's first death. John, carried away in the Spirit, may well be the same as depicted in Matthew 4:1, yet it seems to lead to where he could see the holy Jerusalem as it descended out of heaven from God. This new understanding had not yet come to man. This was, if you please, a coming from a higher vibration into one that the new consciousness in man could recognize. The conscious mind has a great deal of trouble communicating with the subconscious, although we believe it always is in communication with the consciousness and the self. The self finds it difficult to receive subconscious messages because the vibratory rates of the subconscious are higher. We can understand that the still higher rates of vibration in the superconscious, the soul's subconscious, could not possibly be seen or recognized by the conscious or subconscious until John saw it descending out of heaven. If this concept seems a little hard to grasp, remember that we are now working mentally with the vibrations in light, which are lowered further by the infusion of earthly forces in the body. For John, it was necessary to be in spirit to see this new city. For us in the here and now, surely someday somehow, of course, we must consider that the great and high mountain is the endocrine system within us. Since our consciousness is usually centered at the thymus level, the climb to the pituitary, which the mind can rise to, is quite a task, as our dreams indicate time and again. The holy city is the spiritualized body of the Son of Man where only pure spirit reigns supreme. With all the cells of memory in the body cleansed, there are no self-wants, since the will has become one with the will and the creative forces. What is meant by the holy Jerusalem in Revelation 21:10? As indicated, that purpose, that estate to which there is the attaining of those who through the purifying. As has been indicated in the earlier portion. Now come to the holy purpose. As the holy Jerusalem, the Holy of Holies becomes the dwelling as it were of those. This city of the regenerated self is described in the rest of Revelation 21.
Having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal.
Here John begins the description of the bride, the New Jerusalem. This new consciousness, in the Son of God or Christ, is exactly like the body of consciousness in man, and by its functionings literally is the bride of the Christ Spirit. The Prince of Peace, the first begotten of God, the Son of Man, having fought and overcome the dragon who would devour him, has been presented this new city of abode, wherein God dwells. In this verse we come against one of the most difficult passages to translate into language we can understand because of the universal nature of the higher vibrations of mind and body shown. The light is the glory, the service of God to the body and soul. This would seem to be like the light seen in some dreams or near-death experiences, which is beyond description, except in terms of out of this world. This particular light was like unto a stone most precious. Here again the word like identifies the stone as something even John could not describe, except as an inner feeling of inexpressible beauty. This may be the white stone mentioned in Revelation 2:17, in which the stumbling block was the fault of the activity of the angel of the Church of Philadelphia. The solar plexus, or seat of all memories. Now cleansed, it becomes the white stone, a clean memory, clear as crystal. The clear, crystallized form of the memories cannot be changed now, because the crystal is a pure form in nature. This also accounts for the new name in that verse. The phrase clear as crystal very simply means that John's understanding of the light and stone has now become that clear. He understands.
And had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel.
So begins the description of the city. If we take the city to be the body, the temple of God, then we need to interpret the description in terms applicable to the body and the body-mind. This city now cleansed and purified has around it a wall great and high, which is in line with what one usually does with a precious idea. We build a psychological wall around it as a protection device. Not to protect it could allow some people, some perhaps nearing the end of purification, to succumb to temptation and fall away, even while knowing what to do. This would, of course, bring on the second death mentioned in Revelation 21:8. The Son of Man, Jesus, also had to protect himself in the same manner as any other person. A wall of faith appears to be this wall about the self. The inner city. This wall is comparable to the body's skin covering, as we shall see. However, let us consider this quote from the readings concerning this verse. What is meant by the 12 gates? The 12 manners, the 12 ways, the 12 openings, the 12 experiences of the physical to all, and those that have all been purified in purpose for the activities with same. The 12 manners, ways, openings and experiences all relate to the physical body. The 12 openings relate particularly to the 12 body orifices in man, thus the skin seems to be the more appropriate meaning applicable to the wall. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 1 mouth, 2 breasts, 1 navel, 1 anus, 1 urinary tract. The birth canal makes 13 for woman. This total verse can be considered in conjunction with the 281:63 supplement found in the commentary on the Book of the Revelation. When this supplement was presented to Cayce, he made this comment. Comment on the chart, give corrections and value of it as a key to this study. As interpreted in the minds of those who have put the chart together, this in the main is very good. As to the varied centers, their reactions and activities, these, to be sure, become more individual. But as we have indicated, and as will be the experience of individuals in the study of this chart, these will necessarily respond to that consciousness or awareness that has been attained by the student, or the individual entity. And these should be a helpful influence in the minds of those as they attempt to apply same in their own experience and relationships. To be sure, as given, and as may be the experience of those as they study the outline indicated from the chart, there will be times when individuals will interpret correctly. There will be times when there will be doubts. Until a practical application of same is made in the experience of the individual entity. While the entire supplement is not included herein, this reading's comment makes clear that the study of the Revelation is a very personal experience for each of us. As a practical application of it is made in each individual's experience. In this verse there are also 12 angels at these gates, with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel written on the gates. What is the significance of the 12 angels? The 12 purposes as represented by the activities of the openings to the bodily forces for their activities in the experiences of expression in the phases of the activities of the individual. Please explain the 12 names which represent the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. The same as the 12 gates, the 12 angels, the 12 ways, the 12 understandings. Or the approach to Israel, the seeker. All seeking not then as the expression of self, but as one in the Holy One. A question might be asked about how we can become seekers. We need to consider what the number 12 represents. These have been mentioned before in Revelation 7. But this reminder here seems not out of order. The 12 can be the 12 senses, the 5 body, physical, senses and the 7 spiritual senses through the endocrine system. These are also directly associated with the 4 earth elements and mental concepts of time, space and patience. In the first instance 5 plus 7 equals 12, in the second 4 earth elements multiplied by 3 dimensions of consciousness, which equals to 12. The first formula signifies simply a recognition of the senses, while the second indicates a working with the recognition, so as to achieve a new awareness. Thus a seeker is born. This should clarify for us the reason for the 12 angels at these gates. They are there as helpers for us as we try to get the messages coming through the openings into the self, and symbolized here by the new temple, the new awareness which comes to the seeker. And the new tabernacle, or new soul consciousness at the spiritual level. It seems that the emphasis is not so much on expression as in our normal use of these 12 ways, but as seeking 12 ways of being one with the Christ part of us. This verse, as well as 13 and 14, should bring us at least a partial insight into the so-called mystical writings which have existed throughout history. When we consider the symbolism of the 12 gates to be 12 openings to the body, guarded by 12 angels guiding the 12 tribes of Israel in their efforts to conquer the promised land in the self, and all represent influences we deal with in everyday living. The mystical writings come into clearer focus. These are the influences we work with in our attempts to know ourselves, whether or not we are consciously aware of them.
On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates.
The 3 dimensions of consciousness, time, space and patience, on each side of the city, face the 4 beastly natures in man, as we found in Revelation 4, propagation, sustenance, preservation and gratification. These 4 natures are guarded by the 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, who hold back the 4 winds of the earth. If we think of each of these 3 gates as being the 3 elements in a vibration, spirit, idea and purpose, we may get a sort of different concept of the 4 elements or the squaring of these forces within the self-spiritual natures. The bringing of the earthly forces into harmony with the soul's purposes in the earth. This would furnish us with 3 ways to get through each of the 4 walls we have built about our natural instincts, so precious to our very existence. If so, then each of these beastly natures is there to provide a way of escape from the flesh, rather than binding us to the flesh as we usually think of them. If we dare to go through a little regeneration process on our own, we might think of the 4 beasts in Revelation 4 as being the 4 angels in Revelation 7 as they hold back the earthly desires of the flesh. The 4 winds. Thus guarding the self from total indulgence or dependence on them to get what we want. If only we dare to think this way, we may experience a complete change of consciousness regarding our lower natures. We might even begin to be thankful for them. In this manner also we can see that we are really dealing again with the mystical aspects in the ancient writings. In Ezekiel we have 4 mythical beasts, in the Egyptian literature the 4 sons of Horus, in alchemy the 4 elements, as well as in the Bible, the mysticism of the Pythagorean tetractys, as well as the activities in the production of C.G. Jung's mandala. In all of these are shown the 4 influences pictured in the 4 beasts as influences working to bring us into that security, typified by this celestial 4-square city.
And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb.
The key to understanding this verse may be found in the 2 words, in them, rather than on them. Here is a recognition of the work of Jesus's ministry. The 12 apostles had in them the very essence, the foundations of his work. They were chosen because they represented the 12 stumbling blocks in man, and when we consider the 12 gates, the 12 angels and the 12 tribes in the light of the essences of a vibration, then we have this 12 ideas as foundations in the 12 tribes, 12 spirits as the 12 angels, stumbling stones, and 12 purposes in 12 apostles. All of these represent a total oneness in the ministry of Jesus, even as the oneness in a vibration. For when we multiply the 12 times 12 in each of the 3 lines above, we arrive at 144 for each vibration represented by the tribes. The stumbling stones and apostles are all the same as the 144,000 found in the tribes of Israel in Revelation 7. We can now see that the words in them fit correctly in this verse, as well as the need for the measurements found in the next verse. The wall makes sense, we really are walled into self.
And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof.
We may wonder about the identity of he that talked with me. It does not appear to be the voice, Revelation 19 verse 9 and 10. For that one relates to the Peter meaning and all. This he we take to be the one of the seven angels in verse 9. And if so, it should be that angelic influence we call the Iranian, which relates to our use of will. At least this ties in with the purposes stressed in the readings. In 11:1 John was given a reed like a rod to measure the temple. That temple was the physical and mental body, particularly mental concepts. He, the angel, is the one measuring the city. And this would indicate that the measurements are non-physical, as well as non-mental. They are entirely spiritual dimensions, regardless of objective perceptible beingness which man likes to see to believe. Revelation 21:15. Please interpret, what is the golden reed to measure the city? And what is the significance of the stones of the New Jerusalem and their colors? The new understanding, the reed to measure the city, the abilities of each. Not unto all, is it given to be ministers, not unto all to be interpreters, not unto all to be this or that, but measured according to that whereunto they have purposed in their hearts. Though all are as one, remember it has been given, that the purpose of the heart is to know yourself to be yourself, and yet one with God even as Jesus, even as is represented in God the Father, Christ the Son, and the Holy Spirit, each knowing themselves to be themselves yet one. So the measurements for those that make the vibrations within themselves that become attuned to the new purpose, the new desire, the new hopes, the new revelation, the new understandings to do the will of the Father with the will of that made perfect in the Christ. We can see that this measurement has to do with the purposes in their hearts. When the purpose is to know yourself to be yourself, and yet one with God, then the measurement according to spiritual purposes comes into play, for there then will be no purpose for self. The will made one with God's will allows no tinge of earthliness in the being, and this also means none of man's concepts or ideas of whatever nature. Thus there can be that attunement to a new purpose, a new understanding to do the will of the Father, as made perfect in the Christ. It is from this viewpoint we may come to understand what Meister Eckhart meant when he said, "I pray God to rid me of God." It might seem hard for us to even think of being in such a mental state that we would have no desire except to do the will of the Father, but to be rid of God too, as Meister Eckhart prayed for, seems a little too much for most of us. Yet this would be, in the words of Meister Eckhart, a detached man, detached from all earthly concepts, through which the Father speaks his eternal word in the soul of detached man. The word he speaks is the divine word itself. We must not overlook the deeper implications of this golden reed. As mentioned in 11:1, John was measuring the temple of God. Here the measurement is of the city, the holy Jerusalem. They are the same except that the temple, by reason of its purification, has now become the city, where there is only one purpose expressed, and that is that the Son of Man has become the bride of the Holy Spirit. The acceptance principle in Eve, who came from within Adam, has overcome the projection principle, the doing for self, and has become the bride in the return to the Father from man's projection into the flesh. The return to first principles is the golden reed.
And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal.
Here we must be reminded of the 144,000 in Revelation 7:4, just as in verse 12. This also reminds us of a perfect vibration wherein there are three measurements involved. In view of the emphasis on vibration in 281:37, under verse 15, we should consider this verse in that light. The four-square city is a completed mandala. The length, breadth and height are equal, showing that the meanings and activities of spirit, idea and purpose in the new vibration are all equal in value, as is the perfected understanding reached through time, space and patience. We should notice that the length and breadth are specifically set apart in the verse before the height comes into play. This is because the city is 12,000 furlongs of base in the earth, the foundation, verse 14, and this base is 3 times 4, time, space and patience multiplied by the 4 earth elements, thus showing that the 4 earth elements squared brings the foundation of the spiritual into being and spiritual consciousness. The height of the cube shows that the new understanding is above the earthly influences, yet all are involved in the perfection found in the Christ consciousness. With the spirit and idea firmly fixed on the earth, the responsibility, patience, completes the oneness with the earth plane of the purposes in the separation, as indicated in Revelation 12 and 13. We should also readily see that these 3 dimensions are related to our awareness in the earth, hence earth plane consciousness is involved here and in the next verse.
And he measured the wall thereof, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel.
The measuring of the perfected consciousness continues here, the wall about the self is the focus, and this is the wall mentioned in verse 12. Since that verse related to purposes, it seems this one also must be considered in the same vein. The measurement is again 144 but somewhat broken down, since the 100, the 40 and the 4 are separated, but the measure is in cubits. The idea of a cube was the shape of the city as shown in verse 16. While the ancient measure, in distance, of a cubit, was that from the middle finger to the elbow, this would not correspond to the furlongs given in verse 16. Hence we must look to the cube itself for meaning. On the basis of the word cubit. For this we must return to the idea of the perfected city as given above. There the entire city, of understanding, was in the form of a cube, as in spirit, idea and purpose multiplied together in time, space and patience, giving us 3 times 3 times 3 equals to 27 and 2 plus 7 equals to 9, or the completion of the return, the cycle, to its beginning, just as we found in the golden reed above. This idea fits well with the next phrase in the verse, according to the measure of a man. And we have already shown this measure in how man works with the elements, as well as with his 3-dimensional consciousness, all because of man's use of will. In the perfected consciousness of Christ there is the use of free will, but through the creative forces, for he gave his will to the Father. Thus we find meaning to the last phrase of the angel that was speaking to John. The angel was the angel of will and directly relates to purpose and the vibrations of will.
And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass.
In verse 11 above we related that stone most precious. Like a jasper, and clear as crystal to the white stone in Revelation 2:17 together, all of such stones, would be the wall about the new understanding, and while in 2:17 the reference was to a new name, here all names, having one purpose, would be all expressions and hence a wall. All of these were like unto clear glass, as in verse 11 above. Meaning one could see through the idea, and get its meaning. This city is of pure gold, and gold is a symbol of returning to first principles, a renewing or healing force. Hence this can be well understood.
And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third a chalcedony, the fourth an emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the 8th beryl, the 9th a topaz, the 10th a chrysoprasus, the 11th a jacinth, the 12th an amethyst.
The walls are garnished with all manner of precious stones, indicating all kinds of precious purposes, but just what these are seems almost anyone's guess. As to the rest of these stones and their properties, there is to be a dearth of information regarding the real or spiritual qualities connected with them. Many qualities and varying properties are attributed to some of these stones, but usually not so much of an enlightening nature on the particular stones mentioned here. The breastplates of the priests in the Old Testament are not the same as these, neither are those related to the various tribes of Israel. One source of information on some of these stones is found in a booklet, Gems and Stones, however, not all of these are given there. It seems, though, that the ones mentioned here are of a crystalline substance and must have had something to do with the psychic or the spiritual portions of the body. Beyond doubt they were important somehow to the developing of a spiritual nature, or they would not have been included in this particular text. We should not abandon our search for meanings. In fact, the real reasons for the stones here could lie in the foundations of man in the earth. In Ezekiel we find a reason for these stones being used on the breastplates of the priests. And this gives us a meaning in the foundation of the Holy Jerusalem. We quote a passage from Ezekiel which refers to the beginning of man in the earth, as the son was being prepared for his journey through the flesh in the earth plane. Thou hast been in Eden the garden of God, every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tablets and of thy pipes was prepared in the day that thou wast created. The italicized words cause us to look at the very foundation of man in the earth. The day he was created. These foundations can be considered to be the basic activities by which man could or would eventually come to return to the Father. In this context it seems not unreasonable to compare these stones with the 12 major divisions of the body, the way they were done in the 281-63 supplement spoken of above. In the context of Revelation 8:3 the body's divisions are also servants of God. In man they are those same servants which helped from the first man to produce the Son of Man, and thus are the foundation of the New Jerusalem, the spiritualized consciousness which is now the bride of the Lamb, the Prince of Peace. The foundation stones, worn by the high priests of ancient Judaism, were of special importance in contacting the Most High in the inner temple ceremonies. Stones are not just stones, they possess properties, just as the major divisions of the body have special functions and specific works to do. The gems mentioned in Ezekiel must have had an effect on the psychic body, or soul, otherwise their use would not have been emphasized, nor would they have been referred to as being in man from the day of his creation. They must play that same part in us. The activity of these stones play a very important part in the comprehension process because of their use in the separation of light into the various colors, as in the diamond and the coherency action of the ruby laser, to mention only two. The various colors and their uses have a vibratory effect on the body in a fashion analogous to the quartz crystal in color TV sets or in watches. At present we generally are unconscious of most vibratory effects on the body, but in the light of modern research and applications of light and vibration, they may not always remain in the unconscious. We are not saying that the stones themselves are in the body, but we are saying that there is an activity in the body relative to that in the stones worn by the priests as they moved into their inner temples. We are not advocating the wearing of any stone to produce a physical or psychic effect. What we are saying is that these stones must relate to body activities which help in the regeneration or the progress from earth man to the Son of Man.
And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of one pearl. And the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass.
Since the reading state 281:37 under verse 12. That the 12 gates, angels, ways and understandings are all the same, then the gates and pearls here have the same context. All of these are an approach to Israel, the seeker. A oneness of effort in the Holy One. The approach to the inner self for understanding, as symbolized by the priests in Judaism, is via vibration from either outside or inside sources. The outside vibrations come from some particular sources, and it is only reasonable that inner vibrations also come from some particular sources, although we usually do not recall them. Besides the endocrine system being a sort of set of energy transformers into interpretable vibrations, it also seems logical that all the organs of the body have an effect in a similar vein, and our bones would also fit this conjecture. Let us consider irritations, which stimulate the growth of a pearl in an oyster, as a source of inner vibrations to the consciousness. Pearls do not grow in our bodies, but polished concepts do become ways to a clearer understanding. In this light the gates of pearl make a great deal of sense as we move into a purer understanding exemplified in the Christ consciousness. When this idea is applied to the various stones in the previous verse, we might have a better understanding of the inner promptings from the major body divisions. Notice that the city here has only one street. While we have often heard of the much revered heavenly concept of the city with streets of pure gold, the one street here seems to point to the idea of there being only one way to reach that heaven, and that is the Christ way.
And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it.
It is hard to imagine a city in the shape of a cube enclosed in 4 walls made of jewel-like stones, having 12 gates of pearl which are of one pearl, no building in it, and only one street, the whole thing made of pure gold, and all of it seen through, as if it were not there. There simply has to be some explanation for this marvelous place other than the heaven we learned of as a child, and there is. This new city is a place in consciousness, where there is no need of a fixed idea, of a building nor of a place to worship like a temple. Even all worshipful adulations are done away with, for the center of our very being is one with the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb, and they are the temple of that city. And we are pure spirit, therefore there are no manifestations of separated objects in this new awareness. We will have returned to our oneness with the Father. In this we will have demonstrated the meaning of the prayer of Meister Eckhart, to be rid of attachment to things, so as to be no thing, and thus be rid of even a concept of God. This state of being can exist, because the total individual body of consciousness is of pure spirit. The awareness is pure spirit, without an idea and without a purpose, our concept of the Trinity. Seemingly so necessary. Has been absorbed in the one memory. These ideas of no separation are reflected further in the latter verses of Revelation 21, and all show that the brain separation syndrome has been eliminated by the marriage of the opposites.
And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it. For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof.
Plainly this new state of consciousness has no need of a sun, a center of light like the ego, the id. Or whatever name we choose to apply to the knowing self. For all things are only essences and not things in themselves. Likewise there is no reason to think or to reflect on any idea. Hence no moon is necessary. In this holy city is one idea expressed as the all. Well, the glory, the ability to serve of God gives the light, the understanding, the Lamb is that understanding. For he became it. Remember that the conscious brain of thing-oriented awareness has become one with the subconscious holistic orientation.
And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it.
In the Christ the nations. Being the body memory cells which are now recalling only their first cause and purposes, are saved from being used by imposed memory structures during the Son of Man's journey through the earth plane. This is like a promise to us as we too work to become one with the creative forces. In the Christ they all have only one answer as they bring the memories, their glory, their service, of their original purposes to mind. They have the honor of serving the intent and purpose of their Maker. It is thus that they work and walk in the light of it.
And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there.
The gates, as we have seen, relate to the body openings through which we receive stimulus to our understanding and consciousness. In us, as we now are. These gates seem to act as blocks to memory, to our receiving the impulses we should respond to. We shut off what we do not want to remember. For the Christ consciousness pictured here, all memories are now of the same nature, and there is no need or desire to shut them off, all are the same. There is no need for either input or impulses from the body, or from the unconscious. And incidentally no need for dreaming. For the conscious and unconscious are together in their oneness. Hence there can be no night in which to receive such inner prompting from the soul.
And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it.
Here again the nations of memories from the body of the Christ consciousness are shown as serving and bringing honor and glory, service, to that consciousness which had become one. In a way this is repeating verse 24, in part, but that verse refers to the mental and this one to the spiritual. As to vibrations that one is to the idea and this one to the purposes. All are now, in the Christ, in a state of oneness, reflecting the marriage of the Lamb in him, just as we found in verse 22.
And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination, or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life.
This verse is definitely pointed in our direction as a promise of what may be our lot when we too reach that state of consciousness so pictured here. Perhaps we should reread Revelation 20 verses 12 and 13 regarding this book of life. The promise is that upon reaching that stage of being there can be nothing that would defile the awareness. This verse recalls the saving in verse 24 and the shutting of the gates in verse 25. Nothing is allowed to enter awareness other than such memory impulses as would honor and serve the new state of being. These are allowed to enter, as the Son of Man goes about serving God. As Jesus did in his earth life,